Dear listeners, in life, we sometimes face cruel injustices, trampled upon by those we call family. Self-worth, a person's most valuable asset, is treated like trash under the heels of others. My story began on such an afternoon, a fateful afternoon in the very place where I had poured my heart and soul into my work. The moment my mother-in-law, the powerful chairwoman of a prestigious New York fashion house, forced me to kneel for 3 hours in the middle of the grand lobby. Under the gaze of hundreds of employees for an insignificant mistake, I knew my silence had to end, but she didn't realize it. When I made a single call to change everything, she laughed. A laugh filled with arrogance and contempt. She couldn't imagine that just 30 minutes later, that same smile would freeze on her lips, and the empire she was so proud of would be shaken to its foundations by an unbelievable truth. The white marble floor of the grand lobby at the Sterling Designs fashion house was freezing. Its cold seeped through the thin fabric of my pants, chilling me to the bone. But even that couldn't compare to the coldness in the eyes of the woman standing high above me. I, Aurora, was on my knees. My knees were so numb and achy I couldn't feel them anymore. My back was exhausted after 3 hours of maintaining the same humiliating posture. I was kneeling in the middle of the main lobby, the most formal space in the company, where the Sterling Designs logo gleamed in crystal, a place where hundreds of employees, from senior executives to junior staff, continued to pass by. The sound of heels clicking on the floor, the whispers and gossip, the curious, compassionate, and even malicious glances. It was all like thousands of invisible needles stabbing my skin, my shattered self-esteem. I felt like a circus animal, a sinner put on public display. And the director of this cruel play was none other than my mother-in-law, Mrs. Evelyn Reed, the current chairwoman of Sterling Designs. She stood there, at the top of the grand staircase leading to the executive offices, her arms crossed in the pose of an authoritarian queen. She wore an evening gown from the Sterling Designs brand itself. Her hair was elaborately styled, her face precisely made up, exuding an air of icy arrogance. From time to time, she would cast a glance my way. The corners of her lips would curve into a self-satisfied smirk. Beside her stood Ethan, my husband, the company's vice president of marketing. He stood there, tall and handsome in his designer suit, yet he seemed to shrink, hiding behind his mother like a small child. He didn't dare look at me directly. His eyes were always evasive, pretending to be busy with something on his tablet, pretending not to see the pain and humiliation of the woman with whom he had shared 5 years of his life. The reason for all this was ridiculous, stemming from a small oversight at work. That morning, during the presentation of the new collection to partners and the press, there had been an incident. The slide presentation for the collection's inspiration suffered a technical glitch, interrupting the event for a few minutes. I, as a designer in the creative department and directly responsible for preparing that file, was immediately blamed. Although the problem was a system error from the IT department and I quickly fixed it so the event could continue successfully, for Mrs. Reed, it was an unforgivable stain. She considered it an embarrassment, a disruption to the perfection of an event she had poured all her effort into. Immediately after the event, in front of the entire board of directors, she pointed at me and yelled, "Useless! You can't even do such a simple thing right. Someone like you doesn't deserve to work at Sterling Designs." Then she ordered me to kneel in the lobby for 3 hours as an apology, to serve as an example to everyone of the consequences of displeasing the chairwoman. I tried to explain, to talk about the technical glitch, but my words were silenced by her withering glare and an authoritative wave of her hand. Ethan, my husband, was there. He knew perfectly well that every idea, every design, every ounce of passion in that collection was mine. He knew how many sleepless nights I had spent perfecting it. But what did he do? He just walked over, gently tugged on his mother's arm, and said in a weak voice, "Mom, that's enough. Everyone's watching." He turned to me. His voice hardened, his eyes filled with reproach. "Really, Aurora, how could you let something like this happen? Just apologize to Mom and let's go home. Apologize." What had I done wrong to have to apologize? But I knew that in this empire, the truth always belongs to the person with the most power. I remained silent. neither apologizing nor protesting, and my silence was interpreted as defiance. "Fine. So you're stubborn, are you? Kneel. Kneel right here until you learn your lesson. Where's security? Watch her. If she dares to get up before the time is up, fire her immediately." And so I knelt, not because I was submitting, but because my heart was dead. Not to repent, but to give myself one last reason, a final confirmation of the cruelty of these people. 5 years as a daughter-in-law, as a wife, as a creative brain in the shadows, I had endured every kind of indignity. All my design ideas, all my passion-filled sketches, after I presented them, were shamelessly claimed by Evelyn and Ethan as their own. They would take the stage under the flashing cameras, receiving applause and praise, while I could only watch from the shadows, seeing my work stolen by others. I had endured it all for the love I felt for Ethan, for the career my father left me, and for a promise. But today, my patience had reached its limit. They not only stole my work, but also trampled on my dignity and self-worth. I lifted my head and looked directly into Evelyn's arrogant face. My eyes no longer glistened with tears, only a chilling coldness, a terrifying determination remained. Slowly, I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my phone. Everyone around me held their breath, watching my movements. Ethan frowned, about to stop me. Perhaps he feared I would do something crazy, but it was too late. I dialed a single number saved in my contacts. On the other end of the line, it rang just once before being answered. Without any need for greetings, I spoke in a voice that was neither loud nor soft, but every word resonated firmly and clearly in the silent lobby. "Mr. Hayes, proceed. Plan B." A deathly silence fell over the entire lobby. Everyone, including the security staff, was stunned, unable to believe what they had just heard. Plan B. Who was Mr. Hayes? What was this insignificant designer saying? Ethan was the first to react. He lunged at me, trying to snatch the phone. "Are you insane? What nonsense are you spouting?" But I was faster. I hung up and put the phone back in my pocket. Then something happened that no one expected. Mrs. Reed, after a few seconds of bewilderment, burst into laughter. She laughed so hard she doubled over, tears streaming from her eyes. "Oh, please, Plan B. Who do you think you're scaring, little girl? Who did you call? Mr. Hayes, who do you think you are to give orders to my CEO? Have you gone mad from kneeling for so long?" The lobby also began to fill with snickers. They looked at me as if I were a mental patient, a clown trying to put on a ridiculous farce. She didn't know that those would be her last laughs as chairwoman, because a real storm, a storm of power and truth, was approaching, and it was just 30 minutes away. Would my unbelievable order be executed? What secret lay behind that fateful call? And in whose hands did the power of the Sterling Designs Group truly reside? If you're holding your breath waiting for the answer, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to unveil the secret with me in the upcoming installments of this thrilling story. The laughter of Mrs. Evelyn Reed echoed throughout the lobby, a shrill and arrogant sound. It was like a whip cracking in the air, an assertion of her absolute power in this empire. The surrounding employees, who had earlier shown some sympathy, now also began to join in. Stifled giggles, mocking glances, all directed at me, the woman still kneeling on the cold marble floor. To them, I was just a disposable pawn, attempting one last act of insanity before being swept off the board. My husband, Ethan, after a moment of astonishment, also cracked a disdainful smirk. He walked closer, leaned down, and whispered in my ear. His voice was a murmur, but filled with malice. "Aurora, are you done with your little performance? Do you think calling Mr. Hayes is going to scare anyone? He's my mother's right-hand man. You should be more worried about your pathetic designer job, or you'll end up thrown out of here in humiliation." He finished speaking, straightened up, brushed an invisible speck of dust from his jacket sleeve, and turned to his mother with a fawning voice. "Mom, don't bother with a crazy person. She must have lost her mind from kneeling for so long. Just leave her there. When the time is up, she'll know her place and come crawling home." Mrs. Reed seemed quite pleased with this spectacle. She gestured to the security team. "Keep a close eye on her. If she dares to make a scene, call the police immediately to have her removed for disturbing the peace." With that said, she and Ethan turned and walked away, leaving me alone amidst the curious stares and whispers. They headed towards the private executive elevator with a carefree air, as if they had just watched an amusing comedy. They didn't know that the curtain on the real drama had just been raised. I remained kneeling there, my back straight, my gaze fixed forward, without a hint of hesitation. I began to count, counting every second, every minute, in anticipation. Time seemed to pass with unusual slowness. 30 minutes. That was the time Mr. Hayes and I had estimated. Enough time to activate the emergency legal procedures, enough for the legal team to travel from their downtown Chicago law firm to here. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes passed. The whispers around me began to die down. People went back to their work, occasionally casting a glance at me as if I were a strange fixture. 20 minutes passed, and a slight unease began to creep in. Was there a problem? Would the plan unfold as intended? But I calmed myself. I trusted Mr. Hayes, my father's best friend, the man who had watched me grow up, the only one who knew my secret and shared this enormous responsibility with me. And then, right at the 30-minute mark, something happened that shook the entire Sterling Designs building. The revolving glass doors of the lobby suddenly stopped. A group of men in dark, serious business suits entered. Leading them was Mr. Hayes, the company's CEO. His face today did not wear its usual kind smile, but a terrifying seriousness and coldness. Behind him were 4 lawyers from one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms. They carried black leather briefcases filled with documents. Their sudden appearance silenced the entire lobby. All activity seemed to cease. All eyes were fixed on them, surprised and confused. The company's security team rushed to meet them, trying to stop them. "Mr. Hayes, you don't have an appointment." But Mr. Hayes simply raised his hand, a firm gesture. "Stand aside. We are executing an emergency decision from the board of directors." His voice was firm, allowing no argument. Mr. Hayes didn't stop at the reception desk. He headed straight for the private chairwoman's elevator. The group entered, and the elevator doors closed before everyone's astonished eyes. Where were they going? What were they going to do? No one knew. Only I, still kneeling on the floor, knew that the storm had truly arrived. A few minutes later, the internal phone on the head of security's desk rang shrilly. I watched his face change color as he listened, shifting from surprise to panic. He stood up hastily and gestured to the 2 tallest security guards. "To the chairwoman's office. Quickly, there's trouble." But before they could move, the elevator doors opened again. This time, the scene inside was even more shocking. Mrs. Reed was being held firmly by 2 lawyers. She struggled and screamed like a madwoman. "Don't touch me!" "What are you doing?" "Hayes, are you insane? How dare you treat me like this?" Ethan, his face pale as wax, was blocked by another lawyer, unable to do anything. Mr. Hayes stepped out last, a folder of documents in his hand. He walked to the center of the lobby, ascended the staircase where Evelyn had stood with all her authority just 30 minutes earlier. He cleared his throat, and his voice rang out clear and strong, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "To all staff of Sterling Designs, I, Arthur Hayes, CEO, am announcing an emergency decision. Due to severe irregularities in management and an abuse of power that has negatively impacted the company culture and brand image, the board of directors, under the authorization of the majority shareholder, has decided that effective immediately, Mrs. Evelyn Reed is removed from her position as chairwoman of the board. All her authority at Sterling Designs is officially suspended." Every word from Mr. Hayes was like a hammer blow in the already tense atmosphere. The entire lobby fell silent. Hundreds of people stood motionless like statues, unable to believe what they had just heard. The chairwoman, removed. It was unthinkable, an unprecedented scandal in the history of Sterling Designs. Evelyn stopped struggling. She looked at Mr. Hayes, then at the crowd of stunned employees. The arrogant smile on her lips had vanished, replaced by absolute panic. "The majority shareholder? Who? On what grounds?" she screamed, her voice breaking. Mr. Hayes did not answer her. His gaze slowly shifted towards me. Then, To everyone's astonishment, he descended from the staircase and walked directly to me. He bowed respectfully and extended his hand. "Madam Chairwoman, please rise. It's all over." The two words, "Madam Chairwoman," that Mr. Hayes spoke not only sent a tremor through the lobby, but were like a powerful electric current that shot up my spine, jolting me out of my humiliated stupor. I lifted my head and looked at Mr. Hayes's steady hand and his gaze full of confidence. I knew it was time to reveal the secret. I took his hand and slowly stood up. My legs, numb from kneeling for so long, wobbled slightly, but I quickly regained my balance. I was no longer the weak, submissive Aurora. In this moment, I was the rightful heir of Sterling Designs, the one who held the destiny of an entire empire in her hands. All eyes were fixed on me, astonished, incredulous, unable to believe it. The insignificant designer, the one who had just been humiliated, was actually the chairwoman, the majority shareholder. This was more unbelievable than a soap opera. Evelyn was the first to regain her composure. She looked at me, then at Mr. Hayes, and burst into a maniacal laugh. "Chairwoman? Her? Ha ha ha! Mr. Hayes, you've either gone senile or you've teamed up with this witch to overthrow me. A parasitic daughter-in-law, a third-rate employee pretending to be the chairwoman. How ridiculous! Ridiculous! She still couldn't believe the truth. To her, I was just a speck of dust, nothing more. Mr. Hayes said nothing, only gesturing to one of the lawyers. The lawyer stepped forward, opened his briefcase, and took out a document with a solemn red seal. "Mrs. Reed," he said in a cold, professional voice, "this is the legal last will and testament of the late chairman and founder of the Sterling Designs Group, Mr. Charles Sterling, father of Miss Aurora Sterling. This will has been notarized and is legally binding." Hearing my father's name, I couldn't help but feel a surge of emotion. Memories from 10 years ago came rushing back with overwhelming clarity, as if it were yesterday. My father, Charles Sterling, was not an ordinary businessman. He was an artist, a true design genius. Sterling Designs was founded by him from a small tailor shop built on his own talent, passion, and sweat. He was not just a leader, he was the soul, the heart of this brand. I had inherited all his passion for design. From a young age, he taught me every stitch, every seam. He taught me to feel the beauty of every fabric. He used to say I was his successor, but a tragic car accident took him from me forever. Before he died, on his hospital bed, he called me and the two people he trusted most, Mrs. Evelyn Reed, his close friend from youth, and Mr. Arthur Hayes, his protege, student, and co-founder of the company. He took my hand. His voice was weak but lucid. "Aurora, my daughter, Sterling Designs is my life's work. I want to leave it to you. All my 70% of the company's shares I will leave to you. You will be the majority shareholder, the one with the final decision-making power." At that time, I had just graduated from college. I was too young and inexperienced. I felt overwhelmed by this enormous responsibility. My father seemed to understand. He turned to Evelyn and Hayes. "But the girl is too young. I want to ask a favor of you both. Evelyn, I will temporarily cede the position of chairwoman to you. Run the company in my place, but remember, you are only keeping the seat warm for my daughter. All major decisions must have her consent. And you, Arthur, stay by her side, help her, and teach her. Be a mentor, a guide, protect her for me." And then he made one last request, a request that has shaped my destiny for the past 10 years. "Aurora, I don't want you to reveal your identity. Start as a regular designer. Experience things for yourself. Learn for yourself. Prove your worth. Only when you have truly matured, when you have the strength to carry this legacy, only then can you proudly sit in the chairwoman's seat. This is the final test I'm giving you. It was a pact, a promise of honor among the four of us." Evelyn, at that moment, cried and swore on my father's soul that she would treat me like her own daughter, that she would support and protect me with all her being. Mr. Hayes simply nodded in silence, a nod heavy with responsibility. And I promised my father that I would agree to step back, to become an heir in the shadows, just to fulfill his last wish. I never imagined that promise would be the beginning of a series of bitter and tragic days in my life, a tragedy called love. After my father's death, I kept my promise. I concealed my identity as the heir and began a new life as Aurora, a regular designer at Sterling Designs. I lived in a small apartment and took the L train to work. No one in the company, except for Mr. Hayes, knew my true identity. Those days, though difficult, were very meaningful. I could live my passion, create freely. My designs, though they didn't bear my name, brought me a quiet happiness every time they appeared on the runway and were admired by everyone. Evelyn, in the early years, played her role as interim chairwoman quite well. She respected my opinion on creative matters and always consulted Mr. Hayes on business decisions. The company developed steadily. Everything could have continued peacefully if not for the appearance of Ethan. He was Evelyn's only son, just back from getting his MBA abroad. His mother placed him as the head of marketing. The first time I met Ethan was in a meeting about the promotional strategy for the new collection. He was tall, handsome, with a charming personality and a radiant smile that could melt any young woman's heart. He was drawn to my bold and creative ideas. After the meeting, he came over to introduce himself. "Hi, I'm Ethan. Your ideas in the meeting today were really impressive." That's how it all began. Coffees after work, endless conversations about fashion, art, dreams. Ethan showed me a different world, a world of romance, of sweet words. I, a girl who only knew work and lived in her father's shadow, was quickly won over. I fell in love, a pure and intense first love. I thought I had found my soulmate, a man who was with me not for my money or status, but for who I was and for my talent. When we decided to get married, Evelyn was a little opposed at first. She complained about my humble origins, that I wasn't a good match for her precious son. But faced with Ethan's determination, and perhaps also out of respect for my position as an indispensable creative mind in the company, she reluctantly agreed. Our wedding wasn't overly lavish, but for me, at that moment, it was the happiest day. I naively believed that from then on, I would have a real family, a husband to love, and a mother-in-law to respect. But married life is not a fairy tale. Right after we got married, I slowly began to see the true face of the man I loved. Ethan wasn't as talented as he appeared. He was lazy, indecisive, and only knew how to live in his mother's shadow. Every decision, big or small, had to be consulted with Evelyn. The vice president position he later got was arranged by his mother. He started taking my contributions, my ideas, for granted. Every time I presented him with a new design, he would glance at it and then present it to his mother as if it were his own work. He stood on the podium of glory, receiving accolades, while I could only watch in silence. Evelyn, once I became her daughter-in-law, also stopped pretending to be respectful. She began to see me as a thorn in her side. She envied my talent, envied the trust Mr. Hayes had in me. She started finding every way to belittle me, to humiliate me. She assigned me trivial tasks unrelated to my profession, forced me to serve her like a maid. And Ethan, my husband, never said a word to defend me. He would stand by silently, and even join his mother in criticizing me. My love slowly died, replaced by disappointment and bitterness. Many times I wanted to tell the truth, wanted to confront them, but I always held back. The promise to my father, the image of a complete family I had always yearned for, stopped me. I deceived myself into thinking that maybe one day they would change. I endured. I sacrificed. I accepted staying in the background just to obtain a false peace. But I was wrong. My patience didn't change them. It only made them more abusive. They saw my silence as weakness, my sacrifice as something to be expected. They didn't know they were playing with fire. They didn't know that the woman they were trampling on was the one who held the power of life and death over the empire they were so proud of. And today, their arrogance pushed me to the limit. The fire they had been stoking for 5 years was finally about to erupt. The lawyer read every clause of the will aloud. His voice was firm and clear, dispelling any doubt in the lobby. According to the will, 70% of Mr. Charles Sterling's shares in Sterling Designs, equivalent to the maximum voting power, were bequeathed to his only daughter, Miss Aurora Sterling. Mrs. Evelyn Reed's chairmanship was only temporary and could be revoked at any time upon Miss Sterling's request. With the confirmation of CEO Arthur Hayes, everything became crystal clear, beyond any doubt. I was not crazy, nor was I a clown. I was the true chairwoman of this place. Evelyn was petrified. Her face paled and flushed by turns. Her lips moved, but she couldn't utter a word. She looked at me, then at Mr. Hayes. Her expression shifted from astonishment to outrage, and finally to absolute panic. "No! Impossible! Old Charles dared to deceive me. Why did I know nothing of this will?" she shrieked. Her voice had become a screech, losing all its usual authority. The lawyer replied calmly, "Ma'am, this will was legally drafted with the signature of the witness, Mr. Hayes here present, and has been sealed at our law firm for the past 10 years. As per the late chairman's request, it was only to be made public when Miss Sterling requested it. It's a fraud. This is all a conspiracy. You two colluded to destroy me," she screamed, pointing at Mr. Hayes and me. She tried to lunge at us, but 2 security guards restrained her in time. Ethan, my husband, was no better. He stood motionless like a statue, his eyes wide, staring at me as if I were a stranger. His mother was not the all-powerful chairwoman. His wife was not an insignificant employee. His entire worldview had crumbled in a matter of minutes. He stammered, "Aurora, you! How is this possible?" I turned to look at him. I looked directly at Evelyn, the woman who had caused me so much pain. My voice was as cold as ice. "You're very surprised, aren't you? You probably never imagined that the person you humiliated, trampled, and forced to kneel for 3 hours was actually the owner of this empire you sit upon." I took a step forward, facing her. "You said I didn't deserve to work at Sterling Designs. Well, now I will be the one to decide who doesn't deserve to stay in this place." I turned to Mr. Hayes and gave my first order as the new chairwoman. "Mr. Hayes, have security escort Mrs. Reed out of the chairman's office. Seal her computer and all her personal documents for a pending investigation. From this moment on, she has no authority in this company." "Yes, Madam Chairwoman." Mr. Hayes bowed his head and gave the order to security. 2 burly guards approached and held her firmly. "Please come with us, ma'am. Let go of me. How dare you touch me? I am the chairwoman. This is my company." She struggled and cursed frantically, but her fight only made her look more pathetic. She was dragged down the hall before the stunned gazes of the employees. Her expensive designer heels screeched on the marble floor. Her once impeccable hairstyle was disheveled. Her expensive makeup was streaked with tears and rage. The image of the powerful queen had completely crumbled, leaving only a defeated, pitiful woman. But that wasn't all. As she was being led towards the elevator, Mr. Hayes raised his voice enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, and one more decision from the new chairwoman. Due to a temporary staff shortage in the cleaning department, the board has decided to temporarily reassign Mrs. Evelyn Reed to the position of janitorial staff effective tomorrow. We expect her cooperation, janitorial staff, from chairwoman to janitor." This blow was even greater than being dismissed. The entire lobby gasped in astonishment again. Upon hearing this, Evelyn's eyes rolled back. Her body went limp, and she fainted in the arms of the security guards. The shock and humiliation had completely overwhelmed her. I stood there, watching the scene unfold without any feeling. I felt no satisfaction, no pity, only a profound weariness. The first act was over, but I knew my battle had just begun. Because there was still someone else to face. The man I had once loved with all my heart. Evelyn wasn't unconscious for long. She was out for only a few minutes and was attended to by the company's medical staff, recovering in the infirmary. But perhaps for her, waking up was more painful than fainting. When she opened her eyes, her world had completely changed. There was no luxurious chairman's office. No secretaries and assistants surrounding her, only 4 white walls and the cold smell of disinfectant. And when Mr. Hayes and the lawyer entered, bringing with them the official transfer decision, she knew it wasn't a nightmare. It was reality, a cruel and stark reality. The next morning, in accordance with the issued decision, she was summoned to the Human Resources Department to receive her new assignment. The janitor's closet was in the building's basement, a damp, dark place with a strong smell of chemicals. It was the complete opposite of the top-floor office, with a view of the entire city where she used to sit. The head of HR, who used to bow obsequiously every time he saw her, now sat behind his desk, looking at her with an impersonal coldness. "Mrs. Reed, this is the janitorial uniform. Please change into it. And this is your work area. It includes the entire hallway and the restrooms in this basement. Brenda, the team leader, will give you specific instructions." The HR manager spoke in a formal tone and pointed to a humble-looking, middle-aged woman standing in the corner. Evelyn looked at the wrinkled, blue work uniform, then at the woman named Brenda, whom she wouldn't have even deigned to look at before. Her entire body trembled. This humiliation was worse than being beaten. "You dare." She gritted her teeth, about to say something, but held back. She knew she no longer had the authority to give orders or shout. She took the uniform in silence and went into the changing room. When she came out, she was no longer the powerful chairwoman Evelyn Reed, just an old cleaning lady drowning in an oversized uniform, her face gaunt and her eyes lifeless. Brenda, the team leader, likely instructed by Mr. Hayes, approached without any deference and handed her a broom, a mop, and a bucket. "Your job today is to clean this entire hallway. Clean it until I inspect it and can see my reflection in the floor. Only then can you rest," she said in a clear voice. Evelyn stood motionless. Her trembling hands took the mop. The mop, something she had never had to touch in her life, was now her work tool. She looked at the dirty floor, then at the long, dark hallway. Tears began to stream down her cheeks, tears of rage and helplessness. She began her work. Her movements were clumsy and awkward. She had never done manual labor like this. Her back, accustomed to leather chairs, now bent in pain. Her hands, accustomed to wearing diamond rings, now gripped a dirty mop. The shock and humiliation were driving her insane. Occasionally she would stop, let out a meaningless scream, and then continue her work in desperation. The news that the former chairwoman had been demoted to a janitor spread quickly throughout the company. Many curious employees went down to the basement to see. They stood at a distance, pointing and whispering. Those gazes, once filled with admiration and fear, now only contained curiosity and schadenfreude. She had become a laughingstock, the talk of the entire company. I didn't go down to watch. I didn't want to witness that scene. My goal was not to humiliate her in such a petty way. My goal was for her to understand one thing. Power is not eternal, and when you are at the top, you should never trample on those below, because you never know if one day the roles will be reversed. The mop she held was the most expensive lesson for her arrogance. While she struggled with her new job, on the top floor, Ethan was also going through an equally terrible time. He had been summoned to my new office, the chairman's office, for a confrontation he could not avoid. Ethan entered my office, the same one that until yesterday had belonged to his mother, with an incredibly complex expression. There was anger, confusion, resignation, and a vague fear he was trying to hide. He was no longer the handsome, confident VP. He looked disheveled, his hair messy, with dark circles under his eyes from a sleepless night. He slammed the door shut without a greeting and walked straight to my desk, pounding it with his fist. "Aurora, explain to me what this is all about. What have you done to my mother?" His voice was accusatory, as if I were the guilty one. I remained seated calmly in the chairman's chair, calmly looking through some documents. I didn't look up immediately, letting my silence and serenity amplify his anger. A few seconds later, I slowly raised my head and looked him directly in the eye. My gaze was no longer one of submission and patience from yesterday, but the cold, distant gaze of a superior looking at a subordinate. "Mr. Reed, I believe you should maintain your composure when speaking to the chairwoman of the board, and I have no obligation to give you any explanations." My voice wasn't loud, but it was filled with an authority that left him speechless. He probably never imagined that the wife he had always looked down upon could speak to him in such a way. "Chairwoman?" He laughed scornfully. A forced laugh. "Don't get ahead of yourself. Do you think just because you're sitting in that chair, you've won everything? Don't forget, my mother still has influence in this company. You've dismissed her, but the other shareholders won't let you get away with it." "Oh, really?" I raised an eyebrow. "We'll see about that. But right now, I don't want to talk about the shareholders. I want to talk about you." I stood up, walked around the desk, and approached him. I was no longer afraid of him. Our positions had now completely reversed. "You came here not because you're worried about me, the wife you and your mother humiliated, did you?" I asked, my voice laced with irony. "You also didn't come to ask how I felt kneeling for 3 hours. You came only because you're worried about your mother's power and your own position as vice president. Isn't that right, Ethan?" Every word of mine was like a knife twisting in his conscience. He took a step back, avoiding my gaze. "Don't twist things. I just want to know why you did this to Mom. She's your mother-in-law, after all, the woman who raised me." "Mother-in-law?" I let out a bitter laugh. "A mother-in-law who forces her daughter-in-law to kneel in front of hundreds of people can be called a mother-in-law? A husband who stands by while his wife is humiliated without saying a word in her defense can be called a husband?" He was speechless. His face turned red, then pale. "Enough!" he shouted, as if to hide his lack of arguments. "What do you want? Why did you do all this? For revenge? Revenge?" I shook my head. "No, I don't have time for that. I'm doing this to take back what is rightfully mine. My work, my honor, and the respect that you and your mother have stolen from me for the past 5 years." I went back to my desk, took out a document I had already prepared from a drawer, and slid it towards him. "And this is the first thing I want to get back. My freedom." He looked down. It was a divorce petition. A flicker of panic crossed his face. "Divorce? You want a divorce? I think we have nothing more to talk about," I replied firmly. "Sign it, and we'll end this amicably. I won't ask for anything from you." He stared at the petition. Then he looked up at me, his expression resentful. He was used to me always obeying, always giving in. He couldn't accept that I was the one taking the initiative to end our marriage. "No, I won't sign," he said flatly. "Don't even think about it. You think just because you're the chairwoman you can do whatever you want? If you dare to divorce me, I won't let you have any peace." A new battle seemed about to begin. A battle not just for power, but for the struggle of a marriage that had reached its end. But he didn't know that I was no longer the Aurora of yesterday, and I was prepared for anything. "You won't sign?" I looked at Ethan. A cold smile appeared on my lips. "Do you think you have a choice?" His confidence, though somewhat forced, surprised me a little. He clearly still didn't understand the gravity of his situation. He still thought that as long as his mother was around, even if she was no longer the chairwoman, she still held influence, connections that could make things difficult for me. He had greatly underestimated me, and that would be his biggest mistake. "Don't test my patience," he growled, trying to sound tough. "Remember that if you're sitting in that chair today, it's thanks to my family. If it weren't for my mother's support, for my advice, you'd still be a low-level designer. How dare you be so ungrateful?" I couldn't help but laugh. A laugh not of joy, but of absurdity. "Thanks to your family, Ethan? Do you really believe that? Or have you become so accustomed to living a lie that you can no longer distinguish reality from fiction?" I stood up and walked slowly to the large window, looking down at the bustling Chicago traffic. For the past 5 years, how many collections have made Sterling Designs famous? How many designs have brought in multi-million-dollar contracts? Would you dare to tell everyone that those ideas, those sketches, were yours or your mother's? He fell silent. He couldn't answer because he knew the answer was no. "You can't say it, can you?" I turned and stared at him. "Because it was all mine. Every success of Sterling Designs, every glory you and your mother have enjoyed, was built on my effort and my talent. You got used to stealing, to enjoying the fruits of others' labor, to the point that you forgot who the real creator of it all was." "You're lying," he stammered, but his voice no longer sounded so confident. "Then let's go to court," I said defiantly. "Let's see who the judge believes, the wife who contributed in silence, or the husband who only knew how to live in his mother's shadow and steal his wife's work. Oh, and perhaps you should worry about your career first." I returned to the desk and picked up another folder. "This is the company's employee performance review report from the last quarter. And unfortunately, your position, VP of Marketing, Mr. Ethan Reed, has the lowest score among the entire executive team. I flipped through the pages, reading the figures aloud. The revenue growth rate under your responsibility only reached 30% of the target. Advertising campaign costs exceeded the budget by 20%. Most marketing strategies are repetitive, with no innovation. How do you explain these numbers, Mr. Vice President? He was dumbfounded. Those numbers were real. Without my creativity, his marketing department was just a clumsy, inefficient machine. It's because of the difficult market, he tried to justify. Difficult, or because you no longer have the endless source of ideas from your small-town wife? I cut him off. With these results, I have more than enough reason to fire you. But I won't do it immediately. I'll give you a chance. I pushed the divorce petition towards him again. Sign here. Agree to leave peacefully, and you can keep a position as a regular marketing employee. If you don't sign, not only will you lose this VP position, but there will be no place for you in this entire company, and I will make sure that with your capabilities, no other fashion house in all of Chicago will dare to hire you. It was a threat, a full-blown ultimatum. I used my power to corner him, just as he and his mother had done to me. He looked at me with resentment and hatred. He couldn't believe that the docile, submissive wife from before could become so cunning and ruthless. You dare? Test me and see if I dare. Our war had truly begun. It was no longer about reproaches and slaps, but a war of power, of survival in the corporate world. He believed he still had a way out, that he still had aces up his sleeve, but he didn't know I had already closed off all his paths. After our tense confrontation in my office, Ethan left with an expression of resentment and fury. He did not sign the divorce petition. He clearly had not accepted defeat yet. He still believed that with his mother by his side, they could still turn the situation around. He and Evelyn began to act immediately. They thought my power was based on Mr. Hayes's support and my father's will. Therefore, if they could neutralize Mr. Hayes and prove the will was fake, everything would return to normal. A plan that seemed cunning but was incredibly foolish. First, they tried to contact the other members of the board of directors. Evelyn, as the person who had led the company for 10 years, still had trusted contacts. She called each of them, crying and telling her version of the conspiracy between Mr. Hayes and me. She painted a tragic picture of how she had been betrayed by a wicked daughter-in-law and a disloyal subordinate to take over the company. She asked them to side with her, to call an extraordinary shareholders' meeting to overthrow me and reinstate her. Some were initially hesitant, but when they investigated further, when they saw the legal will and heard Mr. Hayes's detailed explanation, they quickly realized who was lying. No one dared to publicly support a finished ex-chairwoman embroiled in an abuse of power scandal. All their efforts failed. Undeterred, they moved on to their second plan, attacking the legality of the will. They hired another legal team and filed a lawsuit, claiming the will presented by Mr. Hayes was a forgery. They argued it made no sense for my father to leave an entire empire to an inexperienced daughter, much less ask her to hide her identity. They claimed that Mr. Hayes and I had surely forced my father to sign that will when he was no longer of sound mind. They even found distant relatives who knew nothing of the situation and bribed them to testify against me. The legal battle began, but they didn't know they were walking into an even bigger trap. During the evidence-gathering process, the court requested to reopen my father's entire medical history before his death and to have the will's signature and seal re-examined by experts. The result not only proved the will was completely authentic, but also accidentally revealed another horrifying secret, a secret I myself was unaware of. Mr. Hayes called me to his office and showed me a document the court had just sent over. "Aurora, look at this. I think you should know," he said in a grave, sad voice. It was the detailed forensic medical report on my father's cause of death. Besides the primary cause, the car accident, the report noted an anomaly. In his blood sample from that time, there was a small amount of a toxic substance, a type of substance that could deteriorate the nervous system, causing a lack of concentration and slow reactions. The amount wasn't enough to cause immediate death, but it was the indirect cause that led to the accident. My heart stopped. This. What does this mean, Mr. Hayes? I don't know either, he shook his head. 10 years ago, we were all too grief-stricken and focused on the funeral. No one noticed this detail. But now, reviewing it, it's truly suspicious. A terrible suspicion began to grow in my mind. Who had done this, and why? Just then, one of Mr. Hayes's assistants rushed in. Sir, there's news. Mrs. Reed's lawyers just withdrew the lawsuit. Withdrew the lawsuit? We looked at each other, not understanding. Yes, they say it's due to a lack of evidence, but there's something strange. We discovered that over the last 2 days, Mrs. Reed and Ethan have been continuously calling and meeting with one person. It's a Mr. Peterson, our company's former head of supplies, who was fired 10 years ago for embezzlement. Mr. Peterson. That name sparked a memory. He was the one my father personally fired, and my father's accident happened just 1 week after he was let go. All the loose pieces suddenly clicked into place, forming a terrifying picture. A wild but incredibly logical theory emerged in my head. Was it possible? Was it possible that my father's death was not a simple accident? Was it possible that Evelyn and Ethan were involved? Why did they meet with Mr. Peterson at such a delicate time? Why did they withdraw the lawsuit so hastily right after? The secret they were trying to hide was much bigger than a simple power struggle, and I knew I had to find out the truth, not just for myself, but for my late father. The terrifying hypothesis about my father's death haunted me, preventing me from finding peace. If it was true, Evelyn and her son's crimes were not limited to greed and tyranny, but constituted a heinous and unforgivable act. I made a decision. I would get to the bottom of this truth. I asked Mr. Hayes to, at all costs, launch a secret and thorough investigation into all of Evelyn's activities over the past 10 years, especially around the time of my father's death. Mr. Hayes, tormented by his own remorse and suspicions, didn't hesitate for a moment. He mobilized his best contacts. He hired a team of professional private investigators and top financial experts to review every accounting ledger, contract, and transaction of Sterling Designs over the last decade. The investigation was like peeling an onion. The deeper we dug, the more our eyes stung from the rotten, corrupt truths. It turned out that Evelyn was not just an interim chairwoman. She had abused my father's trust and my silence to turn Sterling Designs into a money-making machine for her own family. What we discovered far exceeded our imagination. First, a network of shell companies and front corporations created in the names of her distant relatives. These companies had no real business activity. They only existed on paper. She used them to sign fictitious contracts with Sterling Designs, from supplying raw materials at exorbitant prices to conducting ghost marketing campaigns. Hundreds of millions of dollars from the company had been sophisticatedly laundered through this network, flowing directly into her pockets. Second, blatant embezzlement of funds. She used the company credit card to pay for her lavish personal expenses, trips to Europe, limited edition designer handbags, and even the construction of a vacation estate in Lake Forest. Everything was justified as entertainment expenses or business travel. Ethan was no exception. His VP position was just a facade. He barely did anything but received an astronomical salary and bonuses. The luxury car he drove, the apartment he lived in, were all paid for by the company. They had treated Sterling Designs as their personal cash cow, milking it for every last drop. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come. When the investigators tracked Mr. Peterson, the former head of supplies, they uncovered a shocking truth. Peterson, after being fired, had not left Chicago. He had started a small transportation company, and his biggest and most frequent client for the past 10 years was none other than Evelyn's front companies. And then a recording was found, a security camera recording from a coffee shop that captured the secret meeting between Evelyn, Ethan, and Mr. Peterson just a few days earlier. In the recording, although the quality wasn't great, Evelyn's panicked voice could be heard clearly. "Mr. Peterson, I'm begging you." That was 10 years ago. "Let it go. I'll give you any amount of money you want. You just have to keep quiet. Don't say a single word." The truth was almost out. My father's death was undoubtedly connected to them. Perhaps my father had discovered Peterson and Evelyn's embezzlement, and they acted first to silence him. The accident was not a coincidence. It was a carefully planned murder. Pain and outrage consumed me. This was no longer a fight for power. It was a fight for justice for my late father. Mr. Hayes and I did not hesitate. We gathered all the evidence, from the financial records and fictitious contracts to that precious recording, and secretly submitted it to the police. The matter was no longer a civil dispute. It had become a criminal case of special gravity. The wheels of justice grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. The day Evelyn and her son would have to pay for all their crimes was not far off. After we secretly handed the entire file over to the authorities, a major case was opened. The best investigators were assigned, working silently but with formidable efficiency. Little by little, each link in Evelyn's criminal network was dismantled. The shell companies were put under surveillance. The suspicious bank accounts were traced. An invisible net had been cast, and Evelyn and her son, the big fish, were thrashing in it, unaware. They were still engrossed in the legal battle they themselves had started, trying to defame me, not knowing that a much more terrible sentence awaited them. Meanwhile, Mr. Hayes and I, with the advice of our lawyers and the covert support of the police, prepared the final act, a play to end it all. We deliberately leaked false information, that there were internal conflicts in the company, that many shareholders were unhappy with the management of a novice chairwoman like me, that even Mr. Problem, Hayes, was being sidelined by me. The goal was to make Evelyn and her son lower their guard, to make them think they still had a chance to turn the tables. And as we predicted, they took the bait. They believed it was the perfect time to deliver the finishing blow. They called an extraordinary board meeting with the purpose of exposing me and reclaiming power. They sent invitations to all board members, major shareholders, and even the media, promising to reveal shocking evidence. On the day of the meeting, the largest conference room at Sterling Designs was packed. The tension was palpable. Evelyn and Ethan entered with an air of confidence. She had regained her chairwoman's demeanor. Flawless makeup, expensive clothes, an icy glare. Ethan walked by her side, head held high, looking at me with the eyes of a victor. They believed they had victory in their hands. Mr. Hayes and I sat on the opposite side, our faces impassive. The meeting began. Evelyn was the first to speak. She stood up and began a melodramatic speech. She spoke of her merits at Sterling Designs, of how hard she had worked for the past 10 years. Then she began to attack me. Ladies and gentlemen, I made a grave mistake in trusting a person with a wolf's heart like Aurora. She took advantage of my affection, of my son's naivety, and then used a fake will in collusion with Mr. Hayes to seize the company. She has no talent, no experience. Under her leadership, Sterling Designs is sinking. I cannot stand by and watch the legacy of my late husband and myself be destroyed. She spoke with an emotional voice, even dabbing at some fake tears. Then it was Ethan's turn. He continued his mother's charade. He talked about how I had changed since gaining power, how poorly I treated him. He even had the audacity to show some clumsily photoshopped pictures of me being intimate with an unknown man, trying to accuse me of adultery. They acted very well. Some shareholders who didn't know the truth began to whisper, showing doubt. When their show was over, Evelyn looked at me with a triumphant smile on her lips. "Aurora, do you have anything to say now?" The entire room turned to me. I didn't stand up immediately. I just calmly opened my laptop and connected it to the large projector in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, my voice was quiet, but it echoed throughout the room. I believe that instead of words, we should watch something more interesting. I pressed play. The projector screen lit up. First, a series of money flow diagrams showing in detail how every dollar from Sterling Designs had been laundered through Evelyn's shell companies. Then, the fictitious contracts, the fake invoices. Evelyn's face began to change color. Next, the security camera video from the coffee shop was played. Although it was silent, the image of her and Ethan hastily handing something to Mr. Peterson was enough to say it all. She started gasping for air. Ethan was as white as a sheet. And finally, the finishing blow. I played the audio file. Evelyn's terrified voice rang out clearly. That was 10 years ago. Let it go. I'll give you any amount of money you want. You just have to keep quiet." The recording ended. The room fell into a deathly silence. Everyone was stunned. The farce of the aggrieved mother-in-law and the betrayed wife had been shattered, revealing the true face of devils. Just then, the conference room door burst open. A team of police detectives, led by an inspector, entered. "Mrs. Evelyn Reed, Mr. Ethan Reed, you are under arrest for investigation into embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, and for your alleged involvement in a 10-year-old homicide case. Please cooperate." The irrefutable evidence had been presented, and justice had finally arrived. After that fateful meeting, the artificial empire of Evelyn and her son completely collapsed. They were handcuffed and escorted out before the stunned and horrified gazes of hundreds of people. The case caused a veritable earthquake, not just within Sterling Designs, but throughout the business world and the media. All their crimes, from embezzlement and fraud to the terrible secret of my father's death, came to light. They became the focus of outrage and condemnation from the entire society. In the following days, I worked tirelessly to stabilize the company alongside Mr. Hayes and other loyal colleagues. We held a press conference, revealing the whole truth with complete transparency and presenting a comprehensive restructuring plan to rescue Sterling Designs from its ashes. A week after their arrest, I received a request from the police. Evelyn and Ethan wanted to see me. They said they had something important to tell me, and only me. At first, I refused. I didn't want to see their faces again. But Mr. Hayes advised me, "You should go, Aurora. It will probably be the last time. Go to close this chapter completely, so you can move forward in peace." I took his advice. The meeting was arranged in an interrogation room at the police station, a cold room with just a metal table and a few chairs. I sat down to wait. A short while later, they were brought in one by one. The first was Ethan. He looked haggard and exhausted. The designer suit had been replaced by a prison uniform. His always impeccable hair was a mess. He no longer had his arrogant, smug air. He was just a pathetic failure. He sat in the chair opposite me, not daring to meet my eyes. "Aurora," he said in a hoarse, weak voice. "I was wrong." I remained silent. I no longer wanted to hear his empty apologies. "I know it's too late to say anything," he sobbed. "My mother, the money." "I'm sorry, Aurora. I'm sorry for everything." He rested his head on the table. His shoulders trembled. I continued to be silent. I looked at him without pity or resentment, only with an inner emptiness. "Can you forgive me, Aurora?" He lifted his head. His reddened eyes looked at me pleadingly. "I promise that when I get out of prison, I'll start over. I'll make it up to you. Make it up to me?" I finally spoke. My voice was as cold as ice. "What will you make it up to me with? Can you give me back the 5 years of my youth that I lost? Can you give me back the trust you trampled on? And most importantly, can you give my father back to me?" My last question was like a hammer blow to his conscience. He froze, his mouth open, unable to say anything. "You weren't just a bad husband, you were an accomplice to a crime," I continued, my voice hardening. "You knew everything, but you stayed silent. Your silence is also a crime. You don't deserve my forgiveness, nor my father's." With that, I stood up. "This conversation is over. Use the rest of your life in prison to repent. It's the only thing you can do." I turned and left, leaving him there alone, facing his irreparable guilt. The next one to enter was Evelyn. She looked even more pathetic than Ethan. Her hair was completely white, her face gaunt, her eyes sunken. She was no longer the authoritarian chairwoman of before, just a guilty old woman awaiting her sentence. Seeing me, she didn't scream or curse. She knelt on the floor, clinging to my legs as she wept. "Aurora, my child, I'm begging you. Forgive me. Forgive Ethan. He was foolish. It was all my fault. I'm begging you." I took a step back, avoiding her touch. "Get up. Don't you think it's a bit late to be calling me your child?" She remained kneeling, her tear-streaked face lifted towards me. "I know I was wrong. I treated you so badly. Greed blinded me. But please, think of the old times. Of your father. He wouldn't want to see his family torn apart like this. My father?" I smiled bitterly. You still have the nerve to mention him? The person you and your lover murdered? You betrayed his trust, turned his life's work into a tool for your own enrichment. You have no right to speak his name." She was speechless. Her entire body trembled. "I came here today not to hear your apologies," I said firmly. "I came to tell you that it's all over. You will pay for everything you have done. This is not my personal revenge. It is justice." I turned and walked out of that cold room without looking back even once. The final confrontation was over. All debts and grudges were settled. From that moment on, their lives and mine would be two parallel lines that would never cross again. The brief but intense confrontation in the interrogation room was not just a final farewell to the past. It was a resounding affirmation of the future, of my new identity. I was no longer the docile, submissive sheep they had manipulated and deceived at will. 10 years of living in the shadows, 10 years of humiliation, had forged me into a lioness, ready to fight to the end, to protect my father's legacy and demand justice for him. After that meeting, I provided my lawyers and the police with all the details of the conversation, further strengthening the irrefutable evidence in the case. Evelyn and her son, perhaps realizing their pleas and performances were futile, stopped cooperating. They began to frantically deny the charges, blaming each other and even the dead. But it was too late. The evidence we had, from financial documents and recordings to witness testimonies, was too solid to be refuted. The trial of the Sterling Designs case became a media event, attracting the attention not only of the business world but of the general public. It was not a simple financial case. It was a tragedy about the corruption of power, family betrayal, and the price of boundless greed. Day after day, the crimes of Evelyn and her son were starkly exposed under the light of justice. The fictitious contracts worth tens of millions of dollars, the shell companies created to launder money, and most chillingly, the detailed reconstruction of the plot that led to my father's death 10 years ago. Mr. Peterson, the former head of supplies, facing the irrefutable evidence and hoping for leniency, broke down and confessed everything between trembling sobs. It was Evelyn who, shortly after my father promoted him, had approached him to instigate the plot. She promised him a large sum of money and an even higher position in management in exchange for administering a slow-acting poison in my father's food. Their goal was not to kill him immediately, as that would be easily detected, but to gradually weaken him, make him lose focus and lucidity, to cause a perfect traffic accident during a business trip. She wanted to take over Sterling Designs, and she had succeeded for 10 years. Peterson's confession was like a bombshell in the courtroom. Evelyn screamed, denying everything frantically, accusing Peterson of being a traitor and a slanderer, but everything was too clear. Ethan, hearing his mother's crimes, the truth behind the death of the man he had always respected like an uncle, completely collapsed. He sat in the defendant's box with a vacant stare. Perhaps in that moment, he finally saw the true nature of the woman, the demon disguised as a mother whom he had always idolized. Finally, after weeks of a tense trial, the final verdict was delivered. For a series of serious crimes, including embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, and especially as the mastermind of a murder, Evelyn Reed received the maximum sentence, life in prison. Ethan, for complicity, cover-up, and gross negligence in allowing his mother to plunder the company, was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Peterson and the other accomplices also received sentences corresponding to their crimes. The judge's gavel struck, a dry, definitive sound that ended one of the most complex and sensational economic criminal cases in recent years. Justice had finally been served. My father, from heaven, could finally rest in peace. I, sitting in the witness stand, cried silently. They were not tears of sorrow, but of liberation. A burden I had carried for 10 years, an injustice against my father, had finally been lifted. The false empire built on crime and tears at Sterling Designs had completely crumbled, not to end, but to be reborn. But the price to be paid by the culprits did not end there. The life sentence for Evelyn and the 25 years for Ethan were not just legal punishments. They were the devastating cost of their arrogance, tyranny, and limitless greed. Sterling Designs, my father's life's work, after a decade in the hands of incompetent and greedy individuals, had become a rotten, hole-filled ship slowly sinking in the middle of the ocean. Immediately after the verdict, the company's stock plummeted. Major partners, those who had worked with my father, canceled their contracts en masse, not wanting to be associated with a brand tainted by crime. Thousands of workers, many of them loyal for years, faced layoffs right before Christmas. The banks sent constant debt notices, threatening to seize all assets. Sterling Designs was literally on the brink of bankruptcy. Many, even my closest advisors, advised me to sell the company or declare bankruptcy to minimize losses. Saving it now is like embracing a giant debt. It's better to sell and recover some capital, Mr. Hayes told me, concern etched on his face. But I shook my head. I couldn't. Sterling Designs wasn't just a company. It was my father's legacy, his soul, the sweat and tears of thousands of workers. I couldn't let it die on my watch. I decided to stay and rebuild it from the ashes. It was not just a business decision, it was a promise of honor to my late father. The road was not easy. I faced countless difficulties. The distrust of the remaining employees who didn't believe a designer like me could run a conglomerate, the abandonment of partners, and the enormous pressure of debt. But I did not back down. I worked day and night. I applied everything my father had taught me, everything I had learned during my years working silently behind the scenes. I started by restructuring the entire company. I ruthlessly fired the incompetent, those who had flattered and supported the misdeeds of Evelyn and her son. I promoted people with real talent, those who had contributed silently but had been marginalized. I built a new corporate culture based on transparency, respect, and creativity. I personally traveled to meet with every partner, every major supplier. I didn't make empty promises. I presented them with detailed business plans, innovative designs, and a new vision for Sterling Designs. Slowly, with sincerity, with real talent, and with the great reputation my father had left behind, I regained their trust. New contracts began to be signed, the cash flow started to recover, and then I made the boldest decision of all. I launched a completely new collection, a collection called Rebirth. It wasn't just clothing. It was the story of my own life, the story of a woman who had walked through darkness to find the light, who had risen from the ashes to become a radiant phoenix. The fashion show was a resounding success. It not only made waves nationally but also captured the attention of the international fashion world. Sterling Designs had truly been reborn, stronger, brighter, and with a completely new soul. While I was busy rebuilding the company, elsewhere, the price of arrogance was still being paid. Ethan, in prison, could not withstand the shock and hardship. He broke down completely, both physically and mentally. As for Evelyn, in the final days of her life in solitary confinement, she was tormented by guilt and loneliness. She had lost everything: power, money, honor, and the only son for whom she had sacrificed everything. That was the cruelest punishment for her. I didn't think much about them anymore. Their lives were a lesson too expensive for society. I focused on the path ahead, a path where I would continue to write the story of Sterling Designs, a story of creativity, passion, and the unbreakable strength of a woman. 5 years after the storm swept through Sterling Designs, on a sunny afternoon in Chicago, I stood on the grand stage of Fashion Week. Camera flashes blinked incessantly. Hundreds of lenses were pointed at me. I was no longer the shy designer Aurora, nor the cold chairwoman of the early days. I stood there in a design of my own, a spectacular evening gown inspired by the soaring lines of Art Deco architecture, a blend of tradition and modernity, smiling confidently as I accepted the Designer of the Year award. Applause thundered through the hall. It was not just recognition of my talent, but also of the miraculous resurrection of a brand. Today's Sterling Designs had been completely transformed. It wasn't just a name in American fashion, but a brand with its own voice on the European fashion map. We didn't follow fleeting, flashy trends. We returned to the core values my father had established, celebrating the beauty of the American woman, combining the essence of our culture with a contemporary flair. Sterling Designs didn't just sell clothes. We sold a story, a sense of pride. The journey to rebuild Sterling Designs from the ashes was not easy. At first, I faced a chaotic mess of huge debts, employee distrust, and partner abandonment. But I was not alone. Mr. Hayes, my father's loyal colleagues, and even the talented employees who had been oppressed by Evelyn, we all rowed in the same boat. We worked day and night, not out of orders and fear, but out of unity and a shared passion. I completely changed the company culture. In the new Sterling Designs, there are no rigid hierarchies. All ideas are heard. All contributions are recognized. I am not a queen on her throne. I am a captain guiding the ship alongside her entire crew, and that ship has weathered the storm to sail into the open sea. My personal life also found a safe harbor. I didn't search for a new love. Love found me. He is an architect, a man with a deep soul and a warm heart. He approached me not because I was the chairwoman of Sterling Designs, but because he saw the real person I am. A woman who has overcome storms but still retains a passionate heart and a sensitive soul. He loves my designs, understands the stories behind them. By his side, I don't need to pretend. I don't need to be strong. I can just be myself, loved and protected with sincerity. Our wedding was held on a sunny beach, with only our closest family and friends. Mr. Hayes, in place of my father, walked me down the aisle. In that moment, I cried, but they were tears of pure happiness. Looking back, I no longer feel bitterness or resentment when I remember Evelyn and her son. On the contrary, I am grateful to them. I am grateful for those 3 hours of kneeling and humiliation. I am grateful for their insults and their cruel acts, because without them, I would probably still be the submissive Aurora, the wife living in the shadow of a lie. It was their cruelty that pushed me to the edge and gave me the courage to break the chains, to find myself, to become the woman I am today. I learned a very valuable lesson. Blind submission never brings happiness or respect. It is only fertile ground for evil and contempt to grow. Only courage, daring to fight, to take control of your own destiny, is the path to freedom and true happiness. A gentle sea breeze blew, carrying the salty taste of the ocean and the scent of jasmine. I took a deep breath, feeling freedom and peace spread through every cell of my body. The past was behind me. The future, though full of challenges, no longer scared me. I had everything I needed. A brilliant career built on talent and ethics, a happy family based on love and respect, and most importantly, the freedom to be myself, to shine like a true queen in my own kingdom. I smiled, a smile of satisfaction. I was ready to write the most brilliant chapters of my life. Dear listeners, every story we bring, no matter how dramatic, contains profound messages and lessons. We want to emphasize that the main purpose of these stories is educational, for us to reflect together, learn, and extract precious values that help us build a better, stronger life for ourselves. The story begins with a haunting image. A woman kneeling for 3 hours in the dazzling lobby of a corporation. That image is not just a humiliation for an individual. It is a symbol, a deep cut into human self-worth. Aurora's pain comes not just from her numb knees, but from the public and cruel trampling of her dignity. Mrs. Reed, in the arrogance of her power, was not just punishing a mistake. She was trying to completely annihilate a person's dignity, turning her daughter-in-law into a scapegoat for her selfish ego and false authority. And perhaps the first and most fundamental lesson we can draw is about the boundaries of self-worth. In life, we can sacrifice many things for family, for love, time, effort, even personal dreams. But there is one thing that should never, under any circumstances, be a subject of trade: self-worth. Self-worth is not arrogance. It is the awareness of our own value, the final frontier that defines us as independent, dignified human beings, not as anyone's property or tool. Aurora endured for 5 years, accepted being in the background, let others take credit for her work. She deceived herself into thinking this sacrifice was for the promise to her father, for the peace of her home. But in reality, it was a process of slow self-erosion of her self-worth. Her silence was misinterpreted as weakness. Her submission was taken for granted. And when people get used to not respecting you, they will go further and further until they trample on you without the slightest remorse. The 3 hours of kneeling were the turning point, the red line that was crossed. They awakened Aurora, made her realize that blind submission does not bring peace, it only feeds the growth of evil and arrogance. What is the lesson for us? Learn to set your own boundaries in all relationships. Love does not mean allowing others to insult and hurt you. A healthy relationship must be built on mutual respect. If someone constantly crosses your boundaries, if they belittle your value, however painful it may be, you must have the courage to reevaluate that relationship. Because if you don't value yourself, don't expect anyone else to. This brings us to the second lesson, a lesson about true strength. Cornered, Aurora did not scream, did not beg, did not use trivial methods to defend herself. She used her ultimate weapon, intelligence and preparation. The greatest strength does not lie in shouting the loudest, but in having aces up your sleeve that no one expects. The Plan B call is the culmination of a silent, persevering, and intelligent process. It shows us that Aurora's silence was not surrender. It was the silence of a strategist calculating every move. She turned the years of being belittled, of being behind the scenes, into an opportunity to learn, observe, and know all the weaknesses of her opponent. The legacy her late father left her was not just the 70% of the shares, but a mindset, a vision. He taught her that true power is not in the title on a business card, but in the intrinsic value we create and the ability to control our own destiny. This story is a profound reminder that in any circumstance, we must never stop investing in ourselves, cultivating our knowledge and skills. Professional knowledge, understanding of the law, the ability to read people, these are the assets that no one can take from us. Evelyn could usurp the title of chairwoman, but she could never steal the design talent, the soul of sterling designs, that resided in Aurora. When you have true ability, you can lose everything, but you can always rebuild from scratch. But when you only have borrowed power, once the chair is pulled from under you, the fall is very painful. Therefore, always be a shadow heir in your own life, silently cultivating your inner worth, so that when the storm comes, you not only stand firm but can change the course of events. In contrast to Aurora, the fall of Evelyn and Ethan is a classic lesson on the price of arrogance and the illusion of power. Evelyn made a fatal mistake. She confused position with value. She thought the chairman's seat gave her absolute power, the right to judge and humiliate others. She forgot that the seat was temporary, that the power was borrowed. Arrogance blinded her, preventing her from seeing the true value of those around her. She belittled Aurora, the one who possessed the creative soul of the company. She belittled Mr. Hayes, the one who kept the machinery running. She herself cut the pillars that supported her own throne. The same was true for Ethan. He lived in the illusion that he was the crown prince, that everything he had was the fruit of his own talent. He didn't realize that from his VP position, his luxury car, and the respect of employees, everything was a reflection of the brilliance of the wife he despised. When that brilliance was extinguished, nothing was left but an incompetent, useless man. The lesson here: never let power, money, or status blind you. Always maintain humility and value those who have contributed to your success. True power comes not from whom you can push down, but from how many people you can lift up. Arrogance is the poison that kills all relationships, destroys all careers, and makes you a lonely person at the top. When you fall, there will be no hand extended to help you. The story also offers a profound message about maturity and how we face victory. After turning the tables, after obtaining all the power, Aurora did not choose the path of petty revenge. She did not become a copy of Evelyn. Instead, she chose a different path, that of reform and construction. The fact that she made Evelyn work as a janitor for a time was not for gloating, but an appropriate lesson in empathy. She wanted her to experience for herself what a regular worker feels, so she would understand the value of respect. But after that, she let the law judge her. She did not abuse her power to punish them. This shows the maturity and vision of a true leader. The lesson here is that victory is not the end, it is a new beginning. How you behave after winning is what truly defines you. You can choose to get drunk on revenge and become the person you once hated. Or you can choose to rise above it all. Use your power to create positive values, to rebuild everything on a new foundation of transparency and respect. Aurora chose the second path. She not only reclaimed Sterling Designs, she resurrected it, infused it with a new soul, a new culture. That is the greatest and most lasting victory. And finally, after all the storms of the business world, the power conspiracies, the story closes with a simple but profound lesson on happiness. Aurora, after reaching the pinnacle of fame, realized that true happiness does not lie in critically acclaimed collections, nor in the powerful title of chairwoman. Happiness lies in a love built on respect and understanding, in the peace of being oneself without needing to pretend or act. She found happiness with a simple man who loved her for who she was, not for what she had. This gives us a profound perspective. The final destination of every journey is not success, but inner peace. Money and power can be useful tools, but they can never buy the serenity of the soul. Never get so caught up in the pursuit of the superficial that you forget to build a solid inner world. Never lose yourself in the race for fame, because when all the stage lights go out, the only thing left is our true selves and the people who truly love us. Live a life where you don't have to kneel before anyone, except to tie the shoelaces of the one you love. That is true happiness. As the creator of this narrative, allow me to share some personal reflections. Honestly, the detail that made me reflect the most was the image of Aurora kneeling for 3 hours. It's not just an action. It's a psychological state that I believe many of us have experienced in different ways. It's the feeling of having to kneel before injustice at work, before the hurtful words of a loved one, or before the prejudices of society. We endure, we give in, and we console ourselves that it's necessary. But this story raises a big question. Does that submission really bring peace, or is it just slowly killing us? For me, the character of Evelyn is not a demon. She is the embodiment of a common psychological malady, power addiction. She craved recognition so much that she was willing to trample on others to assert her status, a tragedy of people with an empty interior. Ethan is another tragedy, that of a boy who never grew up, living under the protection and fear of his mother. His cowardice, in my opinion, is even more reprehensible than Evelyn's tyranny, because silence in the face of evil is itself a crime. The detail I loved the most was the father's decision for Aurora to start as a regular employee. It was a brilliant move, a practical lesson that no school can teach. It shows that to be a true leader, one must first understand the hardships of those in the lowest positions. Perhaps it was those years that gave Aurora an empathy and a vision that Evelyn and her son never had. I believe Aurora's greatest strength came not from the 70% of the shares, but from those experiences and that understanding. The Plan B call was not an act of revenge for me, it was an act of liberation. Liberation for herself and for Sterling Designs from a dictatorial regime. That overthrow was necessary for a new life to emerge. And finally, I firmly believe that a person's greatest value lies not in how high they can fly, but in whether, after falling, they dare to get up and fly on a more correct path. Aurora did that, and that's what makes this story so meaningful to me. We also want to emphasize that the content of our videos is for reference and reflection purposes only and cannot replace professional advice on legal, medical, or psychological matters. If you are facing problems in your life, please seek qualified experts for appropriate and effective support. The opinions and actions of the characters are part of the plot and do not necessarily reflect the official stance of the channel. Dear listeners, the story of Aurora has come to an end, but the lessons on self-worth, courage, and the value of true happiness will continue to resonate. What did you feel while listening to this story? Was there a moment, a detail, that truly touched your heart? Please don't hesitate to share your feelings and reflections in the comments section. Every comment is a valuable piece that helps us build a richer, deeper picture of life together. If today's story has brought you value and moments of reflection, please support us by clicking the like button and sharing this video with your friends and family. And especially, If this is your first time visiting the channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future stories. Your support is our greatest motivation to continue telling stories, sharing values, and spreading human messages. Best regards, and until the next story.